Tim, welcome to Google.
Thank you.
On behalf of Google and all the Googlers here and those streaming from around the world, welcome. It's great to have you.
Thank you very much. This is great. I wanted to do a Google talk for a long time, so I think this is very exciting.
Great, because knowing that you were coming and that you tend to get immersed in a topic, we wanted to get you a small token of our appreciation. It's a book called How Google Works, and I think it's about as long as your posts on Superintelligence. Although it doesn't really. Oh, there are pictures.
Yeah,
I didn't think there was stick figures in there.
This is Eric Schmidt dancing. Good. This is exciting. Thank you.
So this talk was hosted for a group called the Singularity Network, and for a bit of background, it's about a 2,000 Googler mailing list, which frequently goes on 600 post tangents about what really means strong artificial intelligence or whether your computer is going to take over the world. And I'm pretty sure thousands of hours of paid Google time has been wasted on the page looking for circularity in the simulation argument, or accurately grading all of Ray Kurzweil's predictions, or it's trying to see if the Chinese room really could exist in China. It's sort of a hub for
anxious group of people.
Yeah, it is a hub for procrastination about topics that I've heard that you're pretty interested in. So we're really, really excited to have you.
Yes. Well, great.
So for today's presentation, I want to talk about artificial intelligence and how you came to understand it. I mean, to start, I'd love to hear how you were introduced to the topic and why you really started digging in.
Yeah. Well, it was kind of one of those things that I kept hearing about, and I kept hearing like smart people I otherwise respected talking a lot about it. Kind of, it's like Burning Man a little bit. And I'd be like, really? Like, you're really talking about AI? And you're really talking? This was a few years ago. Now, of course, I think more people are aware that this is an important topic. But I finally said, okay, I need to figure out what's going on, and whether this is exciting or scary or both or neither. And so I started reading various kind of books out there. I read Nick Bostrom's Superintelligence book, which is kind of one of the only books that's like simultaneously riveting and like mind-numbingly boring. It's an incredible feat that he's accomplished with that book. I read a bunch of Kurzweil stuff, and think some other kind of excited people like Peter Diamandis, and just there's a crowd of people that are very optimistic, and then I read a bunch of other things, articles, and watched just, nothing that fancy. I read a bunch of PDFs that come out of universities. I watched a bunch of YouTube videos, and the way I kind of do research is instead of worrying about finding a professional source that's definitely going to be the most legitimate, accurate source, I just read and watch and take in like a ton of stuff, most of which alone should not probably be trusted. But eventually, by the time you kind of get to the end, you're like, okay, I at least have a sense of what people are saying. And with AI, there's not really any definitive source anyway. So I just did that for about a month. Nothing too crazy, and then I wrote kind of a big summary of what I had learned. That was the beginning of me working on trying to understand AI.
Was there anyone you read that you were like, wow, this guy is crazy?
Kurzweil's a little...
Hey, he's talked to you before.
I mean, I'm hoping he's right. I mean, according to him, I'm going to be able to switch my senses on and off and to be in a true virtual immersed second reality. And we're going to replace my bloodstream with something different. And
nanobots.
What?
Nanobots.
Yeah. Oh, the nanobots, of course. He lives with a lot of nanobots. We are going to be the AI. We're going to merge with the AI. We are going to be super intelligent ourselves. And it's not just him. I've heard a lot of people talk about that. It sounds insane. But then the people that are kind of more the doomsday type people, they also sound insane.
Yeah.
And I kept looking for someone who's like, don't listen to any of these people. It's just software. Nothing crazy is going to happen. It's going to get very intelligent. Nothing that big or that life-changing is going to happen. And I didn't find anyone saying that. So I said, okay, so at this point now I trust everyone because there's just, everyone sounds insane. You might, there's clearly something weird is going to happen. So yeah, I mean, as I said, it's almost hard to find anyone who really writes about AI that doesn't sound insane, to be honest.
So at Google, we have a few different ways of developing machine intelligence. I think neural nets is one of the most common here. And digging through your post, you mentioned 3 ways that we could potentially get to AGI, ASI. You talk about whole brain emulation, genetic algorithms, neural net inspired. From your research, was there any that you thought would be most likely to reach artificial intelligence?
No, I have no idea what I am not a good person. And most people in this room have a better idea. Honestly, my job is to figure out what people are saying. And the thing is, for other topics I've written about, I've written about Elon's companies and cryonics and other things like that. And I feel way more confident there because there was a lot more consensus. And so I can basically read enough consensus, and now I can take the conviction that the thinkers have, and I can say, now I can speak with that conviction because I can steal their conviction. But when you read a bunch of things and experts are saying opposite things, and I have no self-confidence now, right? So it's like, if I at one point thought that neural nets were an absolutely great way to do it, I've now talked to 3 people who said that is just absolute nonsense. So now I don't want to say anything. But in the last month I've talked to the head of a pretty respected AI company, Vicarious. Right. And 3 or 4 other people like of the same, Miri. I had a chance to talk to Luke Melhuser, something, like the smartest dude ever, and someone who's working in OpenAI. Again, it's really like dramatically differing opinions. So then when I'm confused about something, and I say I'm doing talks on AI, and I don't know what to say about this because I now have lost. My conviction about whether that's actually objectively true. Then and I asked them about it, and I think I get a clear answer, and then I ask someone else, and it's something different. So again, at this point, I'm excited because I always think if it's good, if the good story comes true, of course that's exciting. Everyone's happy about that. We get to slide down rainbows, and we get to we don't have to die, and all the problems are solved. And the bad story is I'm a little it's kind of cool to be here for the apocalypse, right? At least it's kind of awesome to see it happen. So I'm kind of okay, if AI kills all of us, then at least that's interesting. And I'm also selfishly, I'm already kind of by then I'll probably be kind of older. Life isn't that fun anymore at that point. So and for people who are babies now, that's a little less fun. But yeah.
So you're sort of hinting at the idea of an intelligence explosion, right?
Yes.
And this is something I think Kurzweil and Bostrom both are relatively think is very possible. You talked about death and living forever. Why does this intelligence explosion sort of lead to that?
Because I always like to, as just an illustrative tool, draw the intelligence staircase, which is not, of course, scientific, but there is a scale of intelligence, and so an ant has less cognitive ability than a chicken, who has less than an ape, or a chimp who has less than we do, and so the thing that blows my mind about that is that we're not at the end of evolution. We didn't hit the finish button. We're in the middle of evolution. And whether evolution itself is no longer the thing that will create higher intelligence, it could have been that for 3.8 billion years, evolution was the thing. And literally in our lifetimes, that changes. And now, biology building artificial intelligence becomes the new thing. And self-improving AI becomes the new way that the smartest thing on the planet gets smarter. Regardless of whatever the mode is, the fact that the concept of something that is as smarter than we are as we are than chimps, not well articulated. You know what I'm saying though, is just so crazy to me. A chimp is really intelligent. They're almost identical DNA. I mean, that is so incredibly close. If there was an alien from some other dimension that was assessing life on Earth, and they saw a chimp and a human, they would say these are almost the same. These are essentially the same species as far as we're concerned. And yet, not only could a chimp not build a skyscraper or an airplane, when a chimp sees something like that, it just assumes it's part of nature. It can't even understand that we built that. You couldn't even explain to the chimp that that's not a bird, that's something we made, that airplane. You couldn't even, so then I think something that's equally smarter than us, and that's just a little bit, would not only could we not do what it can do, not only could we not understand what it can understand, we can't even get that it built that. Like, it can try to explain it to us all at once, and we won't be able to grasp what it's trying to explain to us. That to me is so crazy. And so that's a little bit above us. Of course, how smart is that thing? If you talk about a human level AGI that's coding itself, that's it's a computer scientist, and it's about as intelligent as we are. But it's a really good computer scientist, like many humans. Then it gets to that level where it can do stuff we can't even understand that it did. How good a computer scientist is that? I mean, it's going to be able to build things and improve itself so dramatically quickly in a way that we literally won't even be able to understand. Now that itself, so that of course leads to an insane intelligence explosion. I always talk about how we have words for stupid. We would say 85 IQ we would call stupid, and 140 IQ we call really smart. But what if something is 14,000 IQ? We can't even begin to understand what that means on Earth. Species that are more intelligent have power. Our higher intelligence gives us power over every single species that's less intelligent than we are. Even something as smart as chimps. We can just put them in a cage. What are you going to do? We have tasers. Good luck with that, chimp. We can poison its food. We have endless tranquilizers. We have endless ways to just completely own them in every way that a species can be owned. And so if you just continue to extrapolate that, well, intelligence equals power. When something is so dramatically more intelligent, then we have to assume it's more powerful, in which case, everything we attribute to God's power, we can look at books like the Bible, that kind of power is actually potentially real when something gets more intelligent. And then, this is where, of course, I have to, drop in that, but I've also heard this thing, which is, an example here is, this is something I've seen people on both sides of, and I'm constantly going back and forth myself, but what I just said about something a little more intelligent than we are, not only can we not do what it can do, we can't even understand that it did it, even if it tried to explain it to us. I've heard people argue that that's not true. I think there's a book by David Deutsch, I've heard, and Elon Musk thinks this, and a few other people that actually that's not true, that we are, at this point, computers. We're weak computers, but we're computers, and once you're a computer, nothing is not explainable to us. There's no such thing as something that we couldn't understand. It's not an analogy. We've crossed some magical black and white line that we are now on this other side where that'll never happen, and that we are conscious, and that things, once we're conscious, there's nothing that is an equivalent of us to animals. Again, these are super smart people who believe this, and I've heard a lot of people who do believe this kind of thing. To me, that sounds insane, just because biology isn't black and white. We're in the middle of evolution. To me, what we call consciousness is just what it feels like to be human-level intelligent, and if something were more intelligent, they would have a consciousness that's a different nature that we don't even begin to understand, that we can't grasp. That's how I see it. But again, this is one of there's 20 of these where it's like a fundamental disagreement in the tech community and in the philosopher communities about this kind of thing. So it's hard to say. It's hard to even imagine what that thing more intelligent than us would be like.
It's really hard to imagine what it would be like, and it's even more hard to imagine what it's going to do, right? And so I think most of us are probably familiar with the paperclip argument and the idea of anthropomorphization. Could you talk a little bit about AI motivation and sort of what you wrote about that?
Yeah, well, a lot of what I wrote about it, came from Nick Bostrom's thinking, because it just made a lot of sense that, it's anthropomorphizing is a real amateur error when you're thinking about this stuff. And if you made a spider super intelligent, bad times for everyone. But it's not going to suddenly, be Mr. Rogers and want to be kind and thoughtful and empathetic, because it's still in its nature, in its DNA, it's still a spider. And so it's still going to want it's going to have that core drive still in many ways. It'll get more complex. Maybe it'll develop some version of its own kind of empathy, but to expect that it's going to have something similar to us, when our version of empathy and our values, valuing humans in particular, is very specific to our brains, which evolved over long periods of time to specifically be this way so we'd be good tribe members in a human tribe on the earth, in this period of time. I mean, it's really specific. And to expect that even a spider, which is biology, so that still has a lot more in common with us, to expect that that even different kind of biology would end up anywhere near the kind of specific values we need it to have, and the specific form of empathy and understanding of life that we need it to have is very low. So then when you talk about something that's not a human at all, I just think it's crazy to assume it's going to be empathetic and altruistic once it gets to that level, because those are human brain, hormonal things. Those are not just automatic. When something gets powerful, something gets intelligent, it's not automatic. And so therefore, then you have the problem of trying to program values. And you have so many different problems with this. One is, if you had a good person, really nice, good human from the year 900, try to program super intelligent being with knowing what's right and wrong, the thing would be like tearing the skin off of infidels of some kind that don't look like it or whatever, and they'd be thinking, I'm doing good for God. I mean, it's really different. We now would say, no, don't put that guy in charge of anything. We have learned a lot. We have a much more nuanced truth about humanity now, and we are going to do it with our values. But again, thinking just along the same kind of analogy, there's a future that will look at us and just think, oh man, they're tribal, they're animal, these were really primitive people. So it's hard for us to program anything in a permanent sense right now and assume that that's going to be a good thing. Secondly, if you ask 10 people on Earth right now, okay, list what's right and wrong. How should we program this thing? You're going to get 10 different answers. ISIS has a really good idea of what they think the AI should be programmed as, not because you can call them evil, but really they just think that they think they know a right and wrong that we don't understand. So you have problems there, even if we all agreed, even if we were eternal in our understanding. So nothing changed. You still have major problems because you can't just program something to do good. Because we don't want the thing to do good. We want the thing to do good for all things, but humans for sure. We don't want it to say, well, okay, I'm going to do good now. Let me look at all this beautiful life on the planet, and, well, there's one species that's killing a lot of the others. Let's get rid of them. We don't want that. So we want it to do good, kind of. We want it to also make sure it's like being selfish dick when it comes to this species in relation to all the others, for example. And then, of course, again, we have disagreements on Earth. So it is just such a nightmare to even try to figure out what we would want it to do in a way we could all agree. Then you have the problem of it's hard to understand how, you can try to program something a certain way and try to program something extremely nuanced like human empathy and hope that then when it becomes dramatically powerful, that that what we think we did is actually what will carry out into this now all-powerful being. We have to, I think Bostrom and some others believe that the initial coding will stick. He says that it doesn't matter how smart a human gets. Human still cares about self-preservation and reproduction and basic human things. That's not going to change. That's at our core, and everything that happens comes down to that. And so, a lot of these thinkers believe that even when something becomes super intelligent, those core goals and that core motivation will still be what it is, and we have to hope we get it right. But then I've heard others that think, that's not necessarily true. We should not assume that something far more intelligent than we are wouldn't begin to change its own core makeup. So, again, this is when I kind of just go, I'm happy this isn't my problem. I'm happy I am not, I don't have to figure this out. I get to sit back and watch the show and kind of root for one way, and because it's just so incredibly daunting. Not that people shouldn't be going for it. I'm happy that other people are doing stuff like OpenAI, which even that, heard people say that's the best thing that's ever happened, and some other people say that is the worst thing that could possibly happen. That Elon and those others are totally off base with that. So it's hard to know anything. But what I do know is that a lot more money, a lot more resources, and a lot more thinking is currently going into AI development than AI safety, because AI development's a lot more fun, exciting, profitable. You're gonna win glory with AI development, not with AI safety, and that's one thing when it's the American or other kind of developed country companies working on it. But what happens when we begin to get into an arms race with it? Even if we have good intentions, immediately safety goes out the door and we start to think we have to win, because if we don't win, they're going to win, and we'll take our chances with whatever we develop. So an arms race is probably the worst thing that could happen. And so, I'm now just like a crazy old man, just like going off on endless tangents, because this is, but yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about the reactions to the post, because I know the community around Wait But Why is a really big thing. I can see that your post was first on our listserv on February 11, 2015, which is about 3 weeks after it first came out. I'll show you the reactions later. But how have people responded to your work on superintelligence?
It's a range. The people who don't know stuff, like me, the people who were like me before I started researching, were all just like, whoa, I need to forward this to everyone. I can't believe this. The same exact reaction I had when I was reading this stuff. And then among experts, I've gotten like a few reactions. There's someone being like, yes, finally someone is saying this well, everyone should read this. And to the other side of the spectrum being like, no one should read this. This is so misguided and full of errors. And then there's like somewhere in the middle, which is like the patting me on the head and being like, this is I wouldn't put my name on it, but this is fine for the layman to read. This will do the job fine. Again, this is not to be taken that seriously. But it ranges, and I've gotten some people that are experts that actually really think that it's a good thing for laymen to read, and others that don't. So I don't know. But again, those people I'm talking about are the tiny minority. Most people were people like me that were just totally introduced to this the first time. When they think of AI, they thought of the Terminator. I mean, that was really simple stuff. Because what do we know about AI? We know what movies tell us. There's a million fiction movies about AI, and that's what people base their info on. And there's some stuff in those movies that is accurate, or that is at least based in science, and other stuff that's totally not. And so I think for that reason alone, just to introduce this to people, to correct some simple misconceptions, like the concept that AI is anthropomorphic, and to understand that the danger isn't that the AI turns on us because it wants power, because that's anthropomorphizing, but that it's simply it builds a new beautiful house because that's what it's working on, and there's an anthill underneath the house, not my problem, and that's where the anthill. So
one of the people who's a fan of your work is Elon Musk, like you mentioned. Could you talk about working with Elon and doing the intense 4-page interview, and are you ready to join his colony on Mars? The metaphorical Mayflower, I guess.
I would say there's a 70% chance that I step on Mars at some point in my life.
Wow.
I think that's fair. I think that's reasonable the more you kind of learn about where things are headed. So that's exciting. And I think there's an even higher chance that I and most people in this room end up in space at some point. I think it's going to be very normal for humans to go to space, to take their 9-year-old for his birthday to space, to, on these little space tours and things. That's going to, I think, become pretty common, and it's going to be really cool. I saw something this morning tweeted by one of the twin astronauts, one of those two. I actually met one of them in person, and there were, and I, which one? I met Mark, and I was like, I want to say that I was reading all your tweets, and thank you for being out there for a year, but maybe I should be talking to you about your wife's heroism, and because you're the other one, and so I just said, thank you for your service. Anyway, so he tweeted something about these balloons, this company that has these huge balloons bringing things into space. It's gonna be cool. Again, very off topic. So back to Elon. Elon read the AI post, and I think a couple others, and he tweeted a post or two. And then his person got in touch and kind of said, he'd like to talk to you about maybe doing some writing stuff. So I had like the most stressful phone call of my life. And I'm in my apartment in my pajamas on my headphones and just pacing around being like, But we had a nice combo after the first, kind of say that he's super awkward. I'm kind of awkward, and so we had an awkward off for the first 5 minutes, an old Western awkward off, and I actually had a chance to talk to him many times, and each time we would begin with a 5-minute old Western awkward off. It takes some time to settle in, and then I read Ashley Vance's book, and he said that so the first after 5 minutes he finally settles down, and I was like, yes, okay, so it's not just me, this is his thing. But no, it was really awesome to get to have a chance to talk to him, and he's so not like he should be, given that he's Elon. He should be more reserved, and he should be just have a lot of certain kind of gravitas, but he's not. He just seems like he's someone who's never changed from who he always was. He's just kind of he'll talk to me on the phone like he'll talk in an interview, like he'll talk to a press conference, like he'll talk to some friends at SpaceX. He just kind of is always who he is, and right away was just talking about all the things he wishes people knew more about, why lowering the cost of space travel is important, becoming a spacefaring civilization, why ultimately Mars is not just a cool thing to do, but really important. Why electric vehicles and accelerating the advent of sustainable energy is critically important. And so it was the biggest no-brainer in history to dedicate time to this. It's a hero of mine who also is taking on the most important issues with the raddest possible companies. Very obvious person to want to dedicate a lot of my time to helping and working on in any way I could. So and then I had a chance to kind of go out to the factories and meet some of the different executives and really talk to them. And there was a lot of trust. We kind of had this agreement that, because they're not, this is not like an old organization who just says, well, this is how we do press here. He just said kind of they kind of said, yeah, talk to people, and they're not all press approved, so just let us know stuff they say and make sure. And it was great. They basically told everyone trust this guy, tell him whatever. I don't know why, but they did. And I honored that by I kept my journalistic integrity because I said I was publishing this on Wait But Why, and I was going to be able to do it the way I wanted. But I said for quotes, I'm happy to send them to you, to let you see if you want them all in there. It's not some weird journal rules journalism rules that I just don't even know what they are, and I don't care. And why have everything be so adversarial? It's just sure, check them if you want to change your quote. You said it. If it's not what you want to say, say something else. It's not and that was the honest thing, and now you're lying. You're still you saying stuff. And the truth is, they changed almost nothing at all. There was tiny little things, the bandwidth of their satellite internet. They didn't want their competitors to. I mean, the tiniest thing. So it was great. It could not have been a more fun project. It got totally out of hand lengthwise. It was a 4-post, 95,000 word thing that just but yeah, it could not have been more fun. And I learned so much about all those industries, about entrepreneurship, about how technology progresses and moves in general. I had to study the past a lot. I had to study the electrical, revolution in the 1880s and Henry Ford, and everything he did. And I had to understand, how airplanes came about and all that. So it was just super fun. And also, probably most importantly, I got to examine how Elon thinks, which is totally the secret. I mean, I'm so convinced that he's smarter than everyone here, and richer, and more ambitious, and more insane, harder working, all those things. But honestly, if that was it, there would be more Elons. I mean, it's his incredible ability to really genuinely reason from first principles in almost everything he does that's important. That is a theme with all those icons in history of all kinds, art and entrepreneurship and politics and whatever, who end up really changing things. And so just to see that up close and to examine it with actual quotes. He has this quote when he was 7 or something. This is from the Ashley Vance book, where he says something he would go to a girl during recess who would say, I'm scared of the dark, and he'd say, I used to be scared of the dark, and then I realized that dark is just the absence of photons in the visible light wavelengths and 500 to 700 nanometers. Or whatever it is. And so when we see that, we hear that, we say, oh, look, that's so like, of course he's being like a little weird, but like he's of course being rational. And like the cute kid is scared of the dark. We all know the dark isn't actually scary, and good for Elon for like, adorably seeing it like an adult. And yet, he says a quote, 30, 40 years later, in some interview that I watched on YouTube where he says, I don't know why people are so scared of starting a company. Really, what's the worst that's going to happen? You're not going to die. You're not going to starve. Like, what's the worst that's going to happen? More people start a company. And I'm thinking, that's the same quote. That's the visible photon absence of, that is the same quote. And the only difference is, he's the only one being the adult there. And we're all the little girl who's saying, I'm scared of the dark. And I had so many epiphanies like that, looking at simple things about the way he talks and things he does, and me saying, that is the whole key right there. That is the answer. So that ended up being the fourth post of the series, just about how he thinks, which it's totally changed the way I at least attempt to grow in my thinking.
One of the things that Elon won't touch on publicly, and actually Google either, is cryonics. But you've recently written a post about it. And in fact, you said you've quit cryo-procrastinating and that you registered yourself, right?
Well, okay, so what happened is, so I made an appointment.
Right.
And I talked to Alcor, and I've talked to a life insurance guy, and I have the plan worked out, and I will pledge to be signed up fully in 6 months. I'm good to die in 6 months. Then what happened was, I was close and he was like, okay, so here's like 17 attachments, just print those out and fill those out, and you need like weird scans of other things, and you need to just make sure you have this information, then fill those out things with the boxes, and I'm just suddenly was like, yeah, okay, I'll do that in the fall. So I am procrastinating now. But the real daunting thing is like, I don't even know how to begin. What do I have to call? How do I trust this company? That work I've done already. So that's why I have faith that I will do it, because I've done all of the really icky things, and I just need to like finish the deal there with like a pretty cheap monthly premium life insurance policy, and I'm like, good, covered. Like everyone should do that. If like living a long time sounds fun. Not that it'll definitely happen, but it definitely will not happen if you don't do it. So.
In the post, you talk about the difference between being dead and mostly dead. Could you talk a little bit about why that matters for cryonics?
Yeah, so dead is not nearly as easily defined a word as we all think it is. 50 years ago, someone collapses on the street, their heart stops beating, they're not breathing. They're dead. They're declared dead, and that's the end of them. Today, if that happens, they're rushed to the hospital. We have resuscitators of all different kinds, and we can usually, often, get them going again and then figure out what was wrong. And very often, those people live another bunch of decades. So they weren't dead. They were unable to be saved with technology 50 years ago. So again, the analogy applies today. There's clinical death, which is when your heart stops beating and you stop breathing. Again, it's been a little bit since I wrote the post. I think that's the exact definition. And that's clinical death, meaning the difference between clinical death and legal death is that clinical death, there usually could be procedures that could try. We know that you are potentially savable, but if you have a do not resuscitate clause, a contract that you've signed. If someone they know they don't have much time left, they have a terminally ill thing, and they're suffering, and once that stops, that's kind of a way for the hospital to legally say, let's let this go, and the person would like to let it go. That's clinical death. Legal death happens once the heart has stopped and breathing has stopped for, I think, 5 minutes, maybe 5 or 6 minutes. I forget what the exact number is. And that's when you are, no matter what at that point, no matter what they tried to do, you can't salvage that because you've now become brain dead. And brain death is the definition of legal death. So again, people consider, today there's clinical death, which we can treat like death. It's not assisted suicide. We can treat like death legally. And then there's legal death when you're officially done. There's nothing we can do. Now, what cryonicists say, and these people are, I was super suspicious going into this. Are these like Scientologist type people? Are these going to be people that are, these are hardcore scientists. These are completely, utterly rational, reasonable people who don't attack the people who disagree. They say, I understand why you think that, and here's our thinking. They're great. Alcor website FAQ is just such a smart place. And what they say is, today, after 5 minutes, you are unable to be saved in 2016. But you very well might be able to be saved and restored, and that illness you have, that even if you could be saved, maybe you only have a few weeks anyway, and it's going to be suffering. Well, maybe that illness also in a hospital in 2040, no problem. We can fix that. We can fix that, and we can also easily resuscitate you and restore you, even if you're brain dead today. What they explain is that brain death is not actually that your brain is beyond repair. It's that the state of your body is such that when blood gets going again, it will damage the cells in your brain. So there's no way to bring you back without then irreparably killing you. Again, 2040, 2060, those hospitals, they might say, this is no problem for us. We easily have technology to help this person. So what cryonics wants to do is, because they do consider you still very much alive and just beyond hope today, they want to put you on biological pause by vitrifying you, not freezing you, because then the ice crystals would destroy your cells. Vitrifying, which is like putting you in a glass-like state where essentially your cells, the activity and the atoms in your body have just slowed so much that they can't move. But they put antifreeze solution actually in your veins so that you will not be able to congeal into it or to crystallize into ice. So you end up vitrified in this biological pause. And they're incredibly honest and fair about saying there's a good chance that the way we're doing this today will have messed something up, and in the future, even if they have the technology, they won't be able to save you, or that that technology will never happen, or that you'll be there and that saving, reanimating vitrified people is not a top priority of theirs. We don't know. But they believe that it will be, because they say, is it a priority to help someone who's in a coma get out of it? Of course, and not because the doctor cares about you or is a good person, because it's their job. And they think that once people start being able to be revived, a vitrified person is just as much a living patient as anyone else. So anyway, they say this might not work, but at least it gives a shot, and it's putting a bet on the future technology. And if you look at the past and how much we would have blown the people's minds in centuries past had we brought them to today, I don't want to bet against the future. The future is going to be rad. It's going to shock us. So I'll take my chances. Sure, like here's my vitrified body. See what you can do. It's better than the alternative, which is really, really shitty, the alternative. So,
many people in this room are aware of the potential impact of superintelligence. We talked about it. And in fact, many of us are on the bleeding edge of its development. What message would you pass along to people who are developing artificial intelligence right now?
Honestly, I want to be like, don't forget about safety, but it's just, I think those people are aware of the safety problem already. It's not like, they're not, these are really intelligent people, and and I think that they're aware of it, and I think that that they are trying to do it in the best way possible. I think they know that this is going to happen. Someone's going to do it. The human species is going to do this. You can't stop humans from the species as a whole from building technology that it wants to build. So I would just say, good luck. Keep going. Seriously, I think they're doing awesome stuff, and I just hope it works out well, and someone's going to do it. And yeah.
Thanks, Tim.
Yeah.
Now, if you don't mind, we'd like to move into questions from the audience.
Yes.
Who should we invite to speak next?
I mean, you're asking me at a weird time, because I'm working on a post that's, I'm about to do a big VR post, very much like in this world. But at the moment, I'm working on a post that is completely unrelated to technology, and it has to do with our culture kind of censoring freedom of speech a little bit, and me being scared as a blogger to write about all kinds of important social issues that I shouldn't be scared to write about, because and as a liberal guy, I'm scared of the liberals here. And so I would say someone like Sam Harris, or
who's also in this topic.
Yeah. Oh, right. And Sam Harris also is awesome when he talks about AI or any of this stuff. He's just one of these people that's interested in interesting things, but he's my intellectual hero. He really is just super logical and super brave. So,
a question up there from submitted. Could you talk about learning new subject areas well enough to write about them? Are there signs you personally use for gauging the soundness of your own understanding of a new area? What are they?
Yes. So I very much am clear about what I am, which is not an expert. I will never try to be an expert. I'm not going to try to teach experts anything. What I'm trying to do is the equivalent of enough where I could sit down at like a table with friends and just be like, okay, listen to this thing I've been reading about for 40 hours. And by the time it's done, they're like, oh, okay, I'm with you. Like I want to go from here to here. If the expert's at the ceiling, I want to go from here to here and then get a lot of people that are curious like me here, up there with me. And so for me, that is often simply I'm reading smart people saying stuff, and then I'm trying to, then the thing that I'm good at, that sometimes they're not, is taking what they're saying, especially if there are multiple views, and kind of building some kind of memorable framework to put them all together in something where someone can read that, and it's one thing to read it and understand it then, but maybe 6 months later still kind of have that in your head, because the framework or the terms or something about the way it was articulated helps you build that permanent framework in your head. So that's my job. And sometimes it's easier. I found cryonics to be easier because there's just the cryonicists that are all saying the same thing. And then there's a lot of people who don't understand it, who are were not to be taken seriously. Ironically, the cryogenicists, who are the ones who work with cold temperatures for things like preserving organs and other things like that, they hate cryonics. It's like this nerd war of like the cold. It's like this odd situation. But just again and again, I would read quotes from them that would say, it would just immediately say, oh, you're just like, you're being like a lying politician. You're just like, you're just slandering them. You're not. So I would just rule them out as interesting intellectuals, and I would try to look for real dissent, because the thing I don't want to do is read a viewpoint and there's a big, very valid dissent viewpoint and I miss it, and then I present this very strongly. If there's a valid dissent point, I want to read both and then present both. So for me, it's just making sure that I've identified what the various relevant viewpoints are, and then once I feel like I've read a bunch of all of them and I'm not being propaganded by one of them, then I'm ready to go. I don't need to go much further than that.
So there are some concepts that make it hard to think accurately. Superstition, for example, makes it hard to do science right. And I'm wondering, I was struck by how often you use the word insane in talking about AI researchers. I'm wondering if it's possible that there's some concept that is contagious and sticky and pervasive in AI thinking, perhaps consciousness, that makes it very hard to think sanely. And so when we ask AI researchers today, it's like asking a medieval theologian about science.
Yeah. I was having a discussion the other day about what are the things that are going to be really offensive in 50 years that we're just going for it with now without realizing it. And one of the things someone mentioned was like the word crazy and insane might be like highly offensive in 50 years anyway, just since I throw it out there like 20 times in this conversation, I want to mention that. I think that to me, the thing that just strikes me is, this could be like, there could be a total delusion here, or they could be a smarter future people or smarter future something might look at us today and say, oh, they were totally missing something critical. I think that's what you're asking.
Something that has to be disbelieved in, like miracles, in order to think accurately about the way the scientific world works.
It may have to do with consciousness. It might have to do with, there's a big distinction. Again, I have trouble with the concept of consciousness, but a distinction between if we do believe in consciousness, and then if the AI can become conscious. If whatever codes that in our brain isn't some magical thing, it's just neurons firing in a certain pattern. So if we can replicate that, we actually might view it as not even necessarily bad if it wins and like we end up out, because it's more important than we are in that case. We're more important. If someone kills a dog, that's bad, but way less bad than if they kill a human. And because humans are smarter, they have a higher capacity for suffering and for joy. And so we consider ourselves more important. If you're looking at me like I'm crazy. But if we get to a super intelligent AI that is conscious, I think in the future we could look at it as very myopic, that we thought that we were this critical piece of the puzzle that we needed to last. We may look and say the thing that is much smarter now is more important. We were an important link in that chain. Right now it's very hard for anyone to think that we're such humans. So that's one thing. And then if it's not conscious, then it becomes this really upsetting thing that it's smarter and then it got rid of us, because we were actually the highest real consciousness, and the thing that's higher than us is now just kind of a mindless thing, and that becomes a huge shame. Still looking at me like I'm crazy, but I would say that probably we're full of those things because we're talking about a higher level of intelligence. That's not something we even have the capacity to understand.
On your blog, Wait But Why, you've written about a variety of high-impact futurist subjects, ranging from AGI to cryonics to the future of energy. In the context of powerful emergent technology, how do you think about the future of society? What areas are you most optimistic or pessimistic about?
We're always in the battle as a society, just like each of us is an internal battle of just, we're like a transition species from, if you looked at, really tribal, almost subhumans before we were fully humans, to wherever we would be going if AI didn't come here and disrupt the evolution, wherever we would end up as a species, of total prefrontal cortex, rational decision maker, just total rational beings that are very kind of that are just totally in charge of their thoughts and come from a total rational place. We're in the middle. We're battling with that new prefrontal cortex we've got and this new rational cognitive ability we have that other animals don't have, and then there's this complete animal that it's stuck inside of. Right. And we are, and so society as a whole is somewhere between, humans as a tribal and warring and just very small-minded animal species, and a species of the future that has just gotten way beyond that. And so I think as technology emerges, the thing is, you don't have to be fully rational as a species to develop amazing, powerful technology. And that's kind of the scary thing. I wish we could get there as a species first before we started building a lot of these things. It's dangerous for an animal species to have that much power because we have very short-sighted, very weird, selfish motivations. I think that it is worrisome as we create more technology that we still are, that the technology is still controlled by an animal species. But I would say a lot of it relates to what I just mentioned. I think that we need to continue to be a marketplace of ideas as a society through all of this, and resist the urge to get too much on a team and really become hate-filled. Which again, my thinking these days is that it's not just a thing of the right, which a lot of leftists like to believe, that it's really on both sides. It's become highly tribal, and I think that makes it very hard for us to move forward in a really productive way.
Earlier, you made some brief allusions to the emerging field of artificial morality. Now, some of the more recent findings in the psychology of morality say that the reason we can have such different morals today than our ancestors did 2,000 years ago, despite having essentially the same genes, is that our morals are a function of primary wants and desires and the environments in which we find ourselves. If that turns out a good way to do it with AI as well, what do you think, as opposed to companionship, ambition, curiosity that drives humans, what should AI want?
It's interesting. Our environment plus our nature, is what determines how our morality will shake out. It's weird because AI, again, it's tempting in that question to anthropomorphize and think, well, what would it want in its environment?
Oh no, what I'm talking about is what should we program it to want?
Right. Yeah. Well, I think we would want to think it's like the Eliezer Yudkowsky thing. What would we want were we better? And I think that's a little bit, you have to get to philosophers about something like this. It goes beyond scientists and engineers in many ways to try to figure out what we would want if we were better, but even better, to figure out, to let something in more intelligent than us figure out what we would want if we were better, because we're not better, so we don't want that. And to continue to understand humans better than humans understand humans, and to understand what humans would be like in a perfect utopia of plentiful resources when everyone is acting totally rational. What would we want then? And basically let it figure it out.
Sometimes blog posts can only achieve so much. Have you considered forming a group or taking on a job that would have a more direct impact on ethical issues like the development of super intelligent AI?
I've thought about different ways to kind of scale Wait But Why, and the jury's still out for I think what I think the best way to do that is. Right now, I kind of think that that I'd rather write a post that inspires a bunch of 18-year-olds at MIT who are smarter than I am to go into those things, and then switch to a different post that I think I can have actually a lot of impact that way by kind of inspiring or educating or getting excited a bunch of people who are more capable of actually figuring out these answers and putting their brain into it than I am. So I think right now that is the way that it's scalable, is that it can scale by basically indirectly directing more energy towards these things. And I think I always fear that if I hire people and start bringing in more of a team, I'll spend my time managing, and we might lose a little bit of what right now is making an impact on Wait But Why. So still figuring it out, but hope to be able to scale this, in certain ways through the future. Yeah.
Tim,
Yeah.
thanks so much. It's been an absolute honor to be here with you today.